July 2nd. On that night, a police officer in a little town in Arkansas, located 500 miles away from where Leila and Raymond lived, this police officer was driving down the road when he spotted an Oldsmobile that was driving with its lights off. And so the officer pulled the car over and he ran the license plate, and it came back as belonging to Leila and Raymond. But you got to remember that this police officer was in Arkansas, and so he had not received any updates about this missing couple. All those TV broadcasts and all the missing person alerts that were getting sent out all over the place, those were really only happening in the state of Texas. And so this officer has no clue that Leila and Raymond are missing. But he runs the plate, he sees it belongs to Leila and Raymond, and he goes up to the driver's side window, and he looks inside, and he sees Leila and Raymond. Leila's driving, Raymond's in the passenger seat, and they look like a really happy older couple. And the officer would say to Leila, "Hey, you're driving with your lights off." And Leila would say, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. You know, we were driving in Texas, and we got lost, and I just didn't notice. I'm really sorry." The officer believed her and felt like these were good people who just made an honest mistake, and so he just flicked her lights on and said, "I'm going to give you a warning, no big deal, no ticket, but be careful with your lights. You got to make sure those are on at night." And Leila said, "Thank you very much, of course, I'll be very careful with my lights." And then actually the officer gave Leila directions on how to get back to Texas from Arkansas, and then he got back in his cruiser, and then he watched as Leila and Raymond pulled onto the main road and then disappeared into the darkness. The police officer in Arkansas who pulled them over would eventually put it together who he had pulled over, and at that point, Arkansas would get in on the search for Leila and Raymond. But for the next 2 weeks, despite having both states aggressively searching for this couple, nobody could find them. That is until July 12th, so that's 10 days after Leila and Raymond got pulled over by that cop in Arkansas. On that day, these two young boys were walking by a small stream in a town called Hot Springs, Arkansas, when they began to smell a terrible smell. They would end up telling their parents, who would come back to the stream and they'd smell it too, and they would end up alerting the police, and the police would come out and they would search that entire area, and they would find Leila and Raymond's Oldsmobile at the base of a 25-foot cliff, and inside the vehicle were Leila and Raymond, and they were both deceased. It looked very much like Leila and Raymond had driven off this cliff and they had landed down below, and that's what killed them. But when investigators went up to the top of that cliff, there were no skid marks on the cliff itself, which meant Leila, who was driving, never hit the brakes as she went over the cliff. Nobody knows why Leila and Raymond abruptly left their town and drove hundreds of miles into Arkansas instead of going to their favorite music festival, although their family members have speculated that it could be because Leila and Raymond had declining cognitive function, and so they basically didn't know what was going on, and that's why it happened. But the reason this story is in this video is because this story about Leila and Raymond is what inspired a very, very famous song from the late 1990s. It's called The Way by Fastball, and for copyright reasons, we can't play it for you, but I'll sing you a line and see if you can remember this song. But where were they going without ever knowing the way? Anyone can see the road that they walk on is paved in gold. It's always summer, you'll never get cold. You'll never be hungry, you'll never be old and gray. Boom, there you go. If you know the song, now you know it's got a pretty intense backstory.